So the stage is yours.
Second. Okay.
So the rules are the same. Ask the questions, as many as you like, and we'll choose the best one.
Second. Okay. Yeah.
Ready?
So I hope it was not so difficult for me to manage to enhance. Okay, so good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and today I would like to tell you about functional autotest development with asynchronous JavaScript. My name is Sergei Chipiga. I'm senior automation engineer in Derivco, Estonia, and my recent work experience a half year in Derivco, online games development company, 1 year in Ranchestop OpenStack contributor and distributor of own cloud platform based on OpenStack, and 2 years in Yandex, top Russian IT company in Yandex browser automation team. I start since asynchronous problem in test development, consider how different frameworks propose to resolve this problem, how Mocha.js proposed to resolve this problem, and which pitfalls it contains, and at the end I will tell you about yet another test development methodology and represent framework based on it. JavaScript is asynchronous. Well, in the core explanation why it works that you may find an official Node.js documentation, and I believe that everybody of you already read it, because this presentation doesn't explain it again. But if you are working on test development, on functional test development, asynchronous behavioral JavaScript may be a problem for you. Let's consider a simple example which opens browser, makes some navigation, and closes the browser. In synchronous languages, you expect that these functions will be called sequentially, step by step. But in JavaScript, it will be really depending from what kind of function do you use, synchronous or asynchronous. And usually in functional test development, you work with asynchronous functions. In this case, interpreter starts to execute these functions sequentially. But due to asynchronous behavior, these functions will be executed concurrently. And at the end, you will get some unexpected error. So, different frameworks propose different solutions how to resolve this problem. For example, Selenium WebdriverIO framework proposed to use imperative style to write a code, like a synchronous language. And similar approach proposed by another popular framework in JavaScript that's called Mocha.js. Well, that's cool. This looks like a synchronous code development and execution, and you not need to think about what kind of function do you synchronous or asynchronous. But in reality, it's not a native for JavaScript, because JavaScript is asynchronous natively, and this is just maybe like some domain-specific language for test development. And usually, in order to implement such functionality, these frameworks contain some complicated logic, or even more say to magic under hood. Well, and if you would like to use some third-party function in this test, you need to register it as synchronous, to register it in this DSL, and I hope these frameworks developers provide such methods to register it. Well, another approach to use chainable calls, when you call some method and it returns the reference to the object, to the original object, and then you may call another method and so on, creating the chain. Well, that's approach proposed by Nightwatch.js or WebdriverIO. This both frameworks also works with asynchronous behavior and with Selenium to manage browser and to execute some tests in browser. Well, that looks nice too, because it's easy to support and it's easy to read and to extend such code. And also, you not need to think about what kind of function do you use, synchronous, asynchronous. Framework resolve it for you, but it's also library-specific solution. And if you would like to use some third-party asynchronous function as a chainable, you should register it too. And I also believe that framework developers provide these methods. It's not possible to break chainable calls with debugger operator and with console log function in order to get some state inside your test. So for debugging, you should involve promises and then function for that. Now let's consider how Mocha.js resolve asynchronous problem. So some words about Mocha.js. Mocha.js is a very popular testing framework in JavaScript with many plugins and a large community and so on. But it also has some pitfalls to work with asynchronous tests, to work with uncaught exceptions, and to work with multiple after hooks. And let I explain you deeply. Okay, in order to resolve asynchronous problem, Mocha.js proposed to use special function that's called done, and this function should be passed to the test and should be involved at the end of last executed asynchronous function in order to notify Mocha.js that asynchronous test is finished. Let's consider the example, what happens if it is not. I prepared some example which have a sleep function, and this sleep function is asynchronous and it prints some sleep message, and it involves twice in tests. So let's see to its output. As we see, please pay attention firstly that it requires no exit flag, because without this flag, Mocha.js will not wait until asynchronous functions will be finished. So it will be exited immediately after test reporting. So you see that firstly Mocha.js reports that tests are passed, and only that asynchronous functions prints message. So in order to resolve this problem, Mocha.js proposed to use done function. And moreover, we also should process this done function in our asynchronous function, in sleep function currently. Well, and usually in JavaScript, it's a popular approach to process some callback when asynchronous function is finished. Yeah, and until last time it considered like a normal solution, but currently in Mocha.js, Node.js supports more greater feature for that, because if you have plenty of asynchronous functions in a test, your code will be like downstairs. Yep, it looks like callbacks hell. I read about article about that, and since it's called callbacks hell. Well, let's see how output looks like. And currently it works correct, because now Mocha.js waits until asynchronous function will be finished, and only then it reports that test is passed. So it's cool because there is a way to work with asynchronous tests in Mocha.js, but in reality it needs to pass and process additional function, and if you don't want to it looks like it's ugly. I think it's not useful sometimes because it's not related with your architecture. Really, it's just some callback for testing. Well, and another problem is that Mocha.js has some problems with multiple done function involving, and I didn't investigate it deeply, but since you may meet some pitfalls there. And as I said, in my opinion, it looks like it. Well, another variant to use promises. Promises is a modern feature in JavaScript. Well, as to say modern, since it's already supported maybe 5 years already. Okay. It needs just to wrap sleep function to promise, but it still requires to use done function, which should be involved inside the same function of promise. So it's cool because it's better because promises are supported natively by Node.js and JavaScript, and it's not a Mocha.js feature. But when you work with this approach, you still need to call done function in the then function of promise. And if you work with plenty of asynchronous functions which return promises, you need to involve plenty of them functions of promises in order to provide step-by-step execution of asynchronous promises. So, and it looks like it creates redundant code, and okay, and also if you don't want to use done function, in this case you should return something in test. Well, to return something in the test, it also looks ugly too, because usually test should not return nothing. And another approach to use latest modern feature of JavaScript that's called async await. And well, in simple case, async await looks like a syntax sugar over promises, but it works in other than promises and allow you to use more interesting things that in promises it would be difficult to implement, like exit from cycle and like try catch processing and so on. And it's simpler to use and to mark in Mocha.js test as async. And if you would want to wait for some asynchronous function which returns promise, you should use operator await. So it's, in my opinion, it's pretty simple, pretty readable. And it provides laconic and readable code, and it's native for Node.js, and it provides step-by-step execution of asynchronous function in the test. Well, maybe as a minus of that, this approach is so often usage of await operator. Okay, another problem which related with asynchronous functions in testing and in Mocha.js is related with uncaught exceptions. I prepared some demonstrative example which fully breaks Mocha.js queue execution. So it's based on previous example, but now it includes error function which raises uncaught exception after some timeout, and it involves twice in test number 1, test number 2, and number 3. And also this test also explicitly wait for sleep function resolving. And all another test just await for sleep function resolving. So in fact, we will get the result which will not be expected definitely, because in this moment test execution is fully broken, and no one of these tests not be correct and not be reliable. So please pay attention firstly that test number 1 involved twice in the report. On the one side it marks as a failed, on the other side it marks as a passed, but it looks very strange. And it happens because Mocha.js has uncaught exception processing, and when error function raises uncaught exception after 1 second of waiting, Mocha.js starts on one side to process process uncaught exception, and it marks a currently executed test as a failed. On the other side, this test explicitly waits for a sleep, and after that, after 1 second, on the other side, Mocha.js starts to process it as a passed. So we have 2 places where Mocha.js processed exactly the same test. So that's why it marks twice in the passed and the failed. And moreover, since this moment, we have 2 places which emit event to start new tests. So since this moment, we have 2 places, 2 chunks of queues which are executed concurrently, queues of tests which are executed concurrently. And in test number 3, the situation will be repeated, and queue will be forked again, and we will get 3 queues, 3 chunks of test queues. And the evidence of that, incremental number of sleep messages. So this is fully broken queue. And we met this problem in production. It's a real problem, because you will get 500,000 failed tests due to such problem. Simple and workable way to resolve this problem: to suppress default behavior and uncaught exception processing, and to log error, to log uncaught error. Or on the other hand, you also may capture uncaught exceptions, suppress default behavior, and then at the end of test, analyze if uncaught exception was met. You may fail currently executed test, and it will not be the same as default Mocha.js behavior. because it's better to get one failed test due to uncaught exception, and in reliable finalizers finish processes, close file descriptors, stop proxies, and so on, which may be related with uncaught exceptions. So it's better to get one failed test than to get a fully broken queue of nightly build with thousands of tests. Okay, and as I mentioned about reliable finalizers in Mocha.js, but there is some specific tool with them. Mocha.js provides you a way to use plenty of after hooks in your test, and if these after hooks will not raise exceptions, they will be executed, all of them. But if you have after hooks, and currently I have two after hooks, and if first hook will raise exception, the second hook will not be executed, and it leads to a real problem. And this output of this previous test execution. So you see that only one boom present, no second boom. So it leads to the problem that if you have a some functional complicated test which involves a browser and proxy, and you would like to close browser and stop proxies independently, and you would like to use two after hooks, if close browser function will raise exception, proxy will not be stopped. So, but it's simpler to fix that. This is a chunk of code which you may use in order to monkey patch Mocha.js, and this is a link for the full monkey patch on Mocha.js runner. Such pitfalls I met when I started to work with Mocha.js, and Mocha.js is a commonly testing framework. But when you are working on functional autotest development for some project, usually understand that it would be nice to have some custom framework which will be related for your testing project in order to provide a rapid way to the test, for test development. But framework development is a high responsibility, because purely structured and not thought out framework will be rather a problem for you than the advantage. And today, I would like to tell you about methodology for rapid test development, which was formulated by me and some of my colleagues in Mirantis, and that's called STEPS. Well, STEPS methodology or STEPS architecture. Since developers' viewpoint, this methodology doesn't provide any innovations, and based on already existing principles like KISS, dry, solid, and some design patterns and so on, in order to provide high code reusage, code readability, and unified approach for test development. But for automation engineers and test development, it introduced some restricted rules to provide unified approach. Some of them, of these principles, may be very obvious, but I should say that we really observed the profit from this approach in a real project, and this project was very big. We'll consider these principles. Well, any complicated test may be divided to atomic steps, to primitive actions, and STEPS methodology introduced a new concept that's called step design, and it's not the same as test design. Almost all tests contain steps which are or may be used in other tests. Each step should be finished with verification that each step passed correct and that its result is correct. This verification is enabled by default, but you may disable it for negative scenarios. And there are three types of steps. Change steps, which used to change currently tested system state, get steps to retrieve current system state, and check steps just for state checking. And there are some rules how these steps should be involved inside each other, but it's out of scope of this presentation. And when you work with this approach, your target rather not to develop autotest, but to develop library of steps Test development is becoming rather the composing of all developed steps, and you involve steps which are reliable, tested, and it doesn't use copy paste, because you involve function which step is a function which works the same in different tests. So because in test development usually copy paste is a real problem. And as I said, we observed profit from this approach in a real project. And the first project was developed with this approach. It's called Stepler. Stepler is a test framework, functional testing framework for OpenStack as a whole multi-component system. And currently, as I know, this framework includes more than 500,000 complicated tests for OpenStack, for all components of OpenStack, including 1.5 hundreds of UI tests. And despite of currently I'm not a member of this project, I was very glad to be co-founder and software architecture of this project. But today I would like to tell you about another project that's called Glaze.js. Glaze.js is functional testing in JavaScript, and it uses Mocha.js as a test runner. Well, and let me talk briefly about its features. Well, firstly, Glaze.js loves JSDoc. Well, it's very nice that there are such excellent projects like Sphinx and JSDocs in order to generate documentation from your source code, and to save code documentation and examples together with code which you develop. And if you change your code, you immediately may update its documentation. So Glaze.js is oriented to complicated functional scenarios, and this is a real example of scenario which we use in my current work to check that all static is exit from server to client. Okay, Glaze.js provides multiple independent verification in the test, because in functional autotests, in complicated tests, it may be very cost to start test preconditions from scratch on each file. And that's why it would be nice to have independent verification to execute one complicated precondition one time before plenty of tests, and then provide independent verifications. So also Glaze.js provides two types of parameterization outside of test, which you usually may need to work with Mocha.js when you use some JavaScript cycle over a test. And also it provides inside parameterization when it parameterizes and iterates in a cycle independently executed verifications. So in this case, a report will be different. If you use inside parameterization, you will get result of one test with parameterized chunks verifications. If you use outside parameterization, you will get 4 tests currently. So it will iterate raw tests. So Glaze.js supports custom retry mechanism, and it supports 2 types of retry mechanism. Chunk retry, this is a native Mocha.js retry mechanism, but with Mocha retry mechanism there is a problem. Because Mocha.js retry happens immediately when Mocha.js test was failed, and Mocha retry cannot retry before all hooks. It may retry only before each hooks. But for complicated scenarios, it also needs to retry before all hooks. That's why Glaze.js supports custom retry, which may retry full complicated test with all hooks which was involved there. Okay, Glaze.js supports multiple reports from inbox, and it's easy to register and develop own reporting system. And this is a link, for example, which hooks should be involved if you would like to develop custom report. And Glide.js supports inbox TestRail reporting system because we use TestRail in current job, and it's very nice service to manage test cases and reports. But in plans to support XUnit format and Allure framework, excellent reporting system which is developed by Yandex. Glide.js developed with steps architecture, and it supports page object pattern. It's a pattern which is popular in web testing. So it's possible to use own page object, already existing page object, but you may develop and inherit a common page and to develop own some custom page and involve it in test. Okay, Glide.js also supports Selenium standalone servers, and it includes it inside. So if you don't specify settings of external Selenium server, Selenium server will be started inside the testing session. And Glide.js supports images comparison mechanism. And because it's not possible sometimes to provide verification of properties, in some complicated scenarios and UI testing, you need to compare some screenshots. That's why Glide.js supports it too in box, and you may make screenshot from one page, go to another page, make a screenshot again, and to compare them. And Glide.js will say you are they the same or are not the same. And moreover, Glide.js supports image searching with pixel by pixel comparison mechanism. So you may go open some page, screenshot its button, and navigate to another page, and ask Glide.js is another screenshot contains screenshotted button or no. Glide.js also supports video capture of executed tests, and moreover, it supports video capture of executed tests from virtual display from XVP virtual server, which is used on Linux systems and will be useful for UI test, for continuous integration test execution when you execute test on headless system. Okay. Also, Glide.js includes proxy subsystems. And it supports two types of proxies: simple HTTP proxy and global transparent proxy, which is used for Google Chrome, because Google Chrome provides options to connect for some external proxy and to send request transparently there. As it supports proxy subsystem, it also supports some proxy middlewares, for example, middleware to cache and reply server responses. And it helps us in our current job, especially in testing environment, maybe not so stable. So we cache send responses from testing environment to the client and then reply them from cache. And also it supports middleware to manage proxy speed. So you may simulate slow connection like 3G, 4G, and so on, and to check how your web application works with slow connection. And it works with different browsers because speed limiting works on proxy side. And also it supports middleware to gather responses data, for example, to gather information resources are zipped or not zipped, which I showed you in first example. And it's easy to register, and I hope it's easy to register and develop own proxy middleware. And this link, for example, how it may be developed. So in plans to expand its documentation, because currently it's open source project, and I spent my free time for that. And there are some ideas how to separate proxy subsystem to a standalone project, and use it as a plugin, and to separate video capture as a plugin too. So that's why it's still a beta version. On my side, that's all. Please, questions. I try to answer them. Yeah.
There was a lot of technologies there, but can you tell what of those you use, or maybe you prefer to use, or you recommend to use in testing, or in what conditions?
If I understood you right, you asked about what technologies I recommend for automation testing, and which technologies should be used in which conditions.
Yes.
Well, difficult questions. Okay.
It's rather tricky question if you have developed your own framework.
Firstly, yeah, some recommendations. If you develop autotests, firstly you and you will be, of course, you will try already existing projects and open source projects and especially popular projects. And I believe that everybody of you will use maybe Mocha.js or JavaScript, and since last time it's become popular, another framework from Facebook, I forgot its title, but its framework seems only for unit testing, not for UI testing. Well, so recommendation to use open source projects to look what usually when I'm looking for a new utility which may be used for testing, because it's very expensive to develop from scratch something. I investigate how popular it's in GitHub, what alternatives are present, and how many issues in GitHub present too. Because framework may be popular, but you may meet some problems which are not resolved still. And to wait until this issue will be fixed, it may be very long. For example, one time I contributed to Selenium patch in Python to support socket timeout in Python Selenium. So we waited for half of year when they merged that. So in work we just monkey patched Selenium, and it was simpler than to wait when problem will be fixed in the original package. So be ready to, if you develop tests, be ready to meet problems which developers doesn't meet, and be ready to resolve them yourself, because maybe these problems will be very specific, and I'm not sure that another developers and automation engineers already fixed them. So, and also read articles about automation, take participation in some chats and forums, and I know some excellent forums which are popular in Russian language space. So it's very common, I understand, because it's very difficult to say what technologies will be applicable for your project.
Okay.
Yes.
Why would you use JavaScript over any other, maybe more performant language for autotests?
Yeah, nice question. Thanks. Well, finally, when I started to work in this position, I was a Python developer, engineer, and 3 last years I developed with Python. But here, I started to develop with JavaScript because project was already started to develop with JavaScript, and it wasn't my solution, and there are already some code base which was implemented with JavaScript. And I should say that, in fact, for me, it wasn't so difficult to switch from Python to JavaScript, but there was some specific to work with asynchronous code. But I was very glad that I understood how it works, and it was a nice challenge to me to understand how promises work, how how Node.js works under hood. So I think to migrate from Python to JavaScript wasn't so difficult. Maybe for me it will be difficult to migrate since Python to Java. Maybe, but maybe not. Maybe not. And this, as I said, this solution to use JavaScript wasn't mine. But I think that currently it's not a problem. And JavaScript has some features which Python doesn't provide. And it's nice also that our developers work with JavaScript. And if I met problems with their code, I may understand what they developed. And if I may say, if I continue to develop my test currently in Python, I'm sure that I will not understand what they develop, because I will not understand what promises, what asynchronous code, and so on. So it's important, I think, to develop tests with the same language as developers work.
Okay.
Probably the last question.
Last question.
Is it possible to write Mocha tests using this steps methodology?
Mocha tests.
Yeah.
Okay.
So make those every step atomic using the Mocha library and.
Mocha.js.
Do you mean Mocha.js libraries? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's JavaScript, and you may develop your steps easily, and you may extend already existing steps. And also, it's possible to use for unit testing to involve any JavaScript libraries which you would like to use. Well, but this framework usually for functional testing for complicated scenarios, not for unit testing. For unit testing, I recommend you Mocha.js.
Okay, you can ask your questions.
My answer is there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Sure.
Thank you.
So, it was awesome talk. I really like that Sergei has a GitHub contributions, has managed to develop his own bicycle, and then later turned it into the framework, and it's gaining popularity. I wish you good luck with that, and also with your methodology. It's really awesome that your company relies on this framework as well. So, as we have promised, the best question to choose. Which one did you like?
I think it's a question about why I use JavaScript. I think so.
Okay, why you prefer JavaScript?
Yeah, because.
So, yeah, raise your hands.
It's very interesting question, I think.
Thank you once again. So let's move further.